Just this morning, Jordan Peterson appeared on Ben Shapiro's Sunday special show interview podcast thing, and he had a pretty good discussion. I really enjoyed it. It was about an hour, 75 minutes, let's say. And he actually had something to talk about regarding this Ta-Nehisi Coates Red Skull situation. So I'm just going to clip something from that. Ben, thankfully, doesn't say much. And that's not, I don't say that because I dislike Ben. I actually think he's very intelligent. His IQ is definitely over 100. And I can't even say that much about myself. So I really do respect Ben Shapiro for his intellectual ability. That being said, I don't actually think he's the best host on the Daily Wire program. I think Knowles is better, and Walsh is definitely the best. But my point is, the reason I said that is because it's just so much more easier to clip for our little prologue for our reading here. So I'm just going to leave you with Jordan Peterson talking about the motivation, I think, the impulse as to why a lot of leftist media and leftist figures like Ta-Nehisi Coates have tried to portray him as this super Nazi, a figure who is even beyond Hitler, right? If Trump is Hitler, then Jordan Peterson, oh no, he's even beyond Hitler. The only logical next step is to literally call someone Satan himself. Although these days, they actually pray to Satan, so I don't think that's even a good example anymore.
Here's something else that I've observed in the media attacks that have been directed towards me. They're not just directed towards me. First, they're directed to who they think I am, so that's kind of interesting to begin with. But more than directed to me, and more perniciously, is that they're directed to those who are hypothetically following me. Now, I don't regard myself as someone with followers. I regard myself as someone with viewers, listeners, and readers. And that's different. But in any case, my typical follower, so goes the story, is a disaffected, angry, young white male. And for a while, I, in some sense, pushed back against that and said, well, my audience is about 70% male, but YouTube skews male, so that's perhaps part of the reason. And I see no evidence that it's particularly limited racially or ethnically, especially when I see my lecture crowds and when I meet people on the street. But then I started to realize that was the wrong response. The right response is, why does it disturb you so much that there's a group of people who, by your own admission, are disaffected and angry and alienated and young, and I'm helping them? And why is that exactly a problem? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing with them? Just out of curiosity. What do you think if you had your druthers? Would I ignore them? Would no one talk to them? Is that actually what you want? Well, the answer seems quite clear, that is exactly what's wanted. That's what's held forth, because there's this implicit assumption in all of this critique that in my very active aid, I'm doing something immoral enough to be parodied, let's say, as Red Skull. And so just what the hell's going on here? It's like, why is that now fodder for parody or slander, precisely? I mean, do you debate the fact that I'm helping? Well, you go read the comments yourself and see what you think. And so then I thought about that a bunch too. I thought, well, what is it with men, the men that I'm speaking to, let's say? Why are they responding positively? Why do they come to my lectures, the biblical lectures even, which is very surprising, right? Because what the hell are men doing at a biblical lecture, especially young men, especially when they could go do anything else and they have to pay for it? It's like, what are they doing coming to this lecture? Well, if the patriarchy is an evil tyranny, then the appropriate attitude towards any male ambition is to not treat it as ambition, but to treat it as nascent drive to tyrannical power, which is certainly what Foucault would recommend, for example, or Derrida, because it's all power. And so if you see some young man trying to stand up and better himself in any dimension, you're not going to trust that. You're going to identify that as the manifestation of tyrannical power. And clearly, if the patriarchy is a malevolent tyrant, then any sign of the desire to contribute to it should be at minimum not encouraged, but more subtly criticized and discouraged at every possible opportunity. And that's our culture.
Praise be our supreme leader, Red Skull. Rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you. Hail Hydra. Part 1. The old hometown. The town I grew up in had been scraped only 50 years earlier out of the endless flat northern prairie, Hail Hydra. Fairview, Alberta, was part of the frontier and had the cowboy bars to prove it, Hail Hydra. The Hudson's Bay Company department store on Main Street still bought beaver, wolf, and coyote furs directly from the local trappers. Hail Hydra. 3,000 people lived there, 400 miles away from the nearest city, Hail Hydra. Cable TV, video games, and internet did not exist. Hail Hydra. It was no easy matter to stay innocently amused in Fairview, particularly during the 5 months of winter, when long stretches of 40 below days and even colder nights were the norm. Hail Hydra. The world is a different place when it's cold like that, Hail Hydra. The drunks in our town ended their sad lives early. Hail Hydra. They passed out in snowbanks at 3 in the morning and froze to death, Hail Hydra. You don't go outside casually when it's 40 below. Hail Hydra. On first breath, the arid desert air constricts your lungs, Hail Hydra. Ice forms on your eyelashes and they stick together. Hail Hydra. Long hair wet from the shower freezes solid and then stands on end, wraith-like of its own accord later, in a warm house, when it thaws bone dry, charged with electricity. Hail Hydra. Children only put their tongues on steel playground equipment once, Hail Hydra. Smoke from house chimneys doesn't rise. Hail Hydra. Defeated by the cold, it drifts downwards and collects like fog on snow-covered rooftops and yards. Hail Hydra. Cars must be plugged in at night, their engines warmed by block heaters, or oil will not flow through them in the morning and they won't start. Hail Hydra. Sometimes, they won't anyway. Hail Hydra. Then you turn the engine over pointlessly until the starter clatters and falls. Silence, Hail Hydra. Then you remove the frozen battery from the car, loosening bolts with stiffening fingers in the intense cold, and bring it into the house, Hail Hydra. It sits there, sweating for hours until it warms enough to hold a decent charge, Hail Hydra. You are not going to see out of the back window of your car either. Hail Hydra. It frosts over in November and stays that way until May. Hail Hydra. Scraping it off just dampens the upholstery. Hail Hydra. Then it's frozen too. Hail Hydra. Late one night going to visit a friend, I sat for 2 hours on the edge of a passenger seat in a 1970 Dodge Challenger, jammed up against the stick shift using a vodka-soaked rag to keep the inside of the front windshield clear in front of the driver because the car heater had quit. Hail Hydra. Stopping wasn't an option. Hail Hydra. There was nowhere to stop. Hail Hydra. And it was hell for house cats. Hail Hydra. Felines in Fairview had short ears and tails because they had lost the tips of both to frostbite. Hail Hydra. Felines in Fairview sounds like a really good TV show. Cats in Calgary. Pussies in Pleasantown. Alright, that's going a bit too far. Hail Hydra. They came to resemble Arctic foxes, which evolved those features to deal proactively with the intense cold. Hail Hydra. One day, our cat got outside and no one noticed, Hail Hydra. We found him later, fur frozen fast to the cold, hard, backdoor cement steps where he sat. Hail Hydra. We carefully separated cat from concrete, with no lasting damage, except to his pride. Hail Hydra. Fairview cats were also at great risk in the winter from cars, but not for the reasons you think. Hail Hydra. It wasn't automobiles sliding on icy roads and running them over. Hail Hydra. Only loser cats died that way. Hail Hydra. It was cars parked immediately after being driven that were dangerous. Hail Hydra. A frigid cat might think highly of climbing up under such a vehicle and sitting on its still warm engine block. Hail Hydra. But what if The driver decided to use the car again before the engine cooled down and the cat departed. Hail Hydra. Let's just say that heat-seeking house pets and rapidly rotating radiator fans do not coexist happily. Hail Hydra. Because we were so far north, the bitterly cold winters were also very dark. Hail Hydra. By December, the sun didn't rise until 9:30 a.m. Hail Hydra. We trudged to school in the pitch black. Hail Hydra. It wasn't much lighter when we walked home, just before the early sunset. Hail Hydra. There wasn't much for young people to do in Fairview, even in the summer, Hail Hydra, but the winters were worse. Hail Hydra. Then, your friends mattered. Hail Hydra, more than anything. Hail Hydra. Part 2. My friend Chris and his cousin. I had a friend at the time. Hail Hydra. We'll call him Chris. Hail Hydra. He was a smart guy. Hail Hydra. He read a lot. Hail Hydra. He liked science fiction of the kind I was attracted to. Bradbury, Heinlein, Clarke. Hail Hydra. I don't recognize any of those. He was inventive. Hail Hydra. He was interested in electronic kits and gears and motors. Hail Hydra. He was a natural engineer. Hail Hydra. All this was overshadowed, however, by something that had gone wrong in his family. Hail Hydra. I don't know what it was. Hail Hydra. His sisters were smart, and his father was soft-spoken, and his mother was kind. Hail Hydra. The girl seemed okay, Hail Hydra, but Chris had been left unattended to in some important way. Hail Hydra. Despite his intelligence and curiosity, he was angry, resentful, and without hope. Hail Hydra. All this manifested itself in material form in the shape of his 1972 blue Ford pickup truck. Hail Hydra. That notorious vehicle had at least one dent in every quarter panel of its damaged external body. Hail Hydra. Worse, it had an equivalent number of dents inside. Hail Hydra. Those were produced by the impact of the body parts of friends against the internal surfaces during the continual accidents that resulted in the outer dents. Hail Hydra. Chris's truck was the exoskeleton of a nihilist. Hail Hydra. It had the perfect bumper sticker. Be alert. The world needs more alerts. Hail Hydra. The irony it produced, in combination with the dents, elevated it nicely to the theater of the absurd. Hail Hydra. Very little of that was, so to speak, accidental. Hail Hydra. Every time Chris crashed his truck, his father would fix it and buy him something else. Hail Hydra. He had a motorbike and a van for selling ice cream. Hail Hydra. He did not care for the motorbike. Hail Hydra. He sold no ice cream. Hail Hydra. He often expressed dissatisfaction with his father and their relationship. Hail Hydra. But his dad was older and unwell, diagnosed with an illness only after many years. Hail Hydra. He didn't have the energy he should have. Hail Hydra. Maybe he couldn't pay enough attention to his son. Hail Hydra. Maybe that's all it took to fracture their relationship. Hail Hydra. Chris had a cousin, Ed, who was about 2 years younger. Hail Hydra. I liked him, as much as you can like the younger cousin of a teenage friend. Hail Hydra. He was a tall, smart, charming, good-looking kid. Hail Hydra. He was witty, too. Hail Hydra. You would have predicted a good future for him had you met him when he was 12. Hail Hydra. But Ed drifted slowly downhill into a dropout, semi-drifting mode of existence. Hail Hydra. He didn't get as angry as Chris, but he was just as confused. Hail Hydra. If you knew Ed's friends, you would say that it was peer pressure that set him on his downward path. Hail Hydra. But his peers weren't obviously any more lost or delinquent than he was, although they were generally somewhat less bright. Hail Hydra. It was also the case that Ed's and Chris's situation did not appear particularly improved by their discovery of marijuana. Hail Hydra. Marijuana isn't bad for everyone any more than alcohol is bad for everyone. Hail Hydra. Sometimes it even appears to improve people. Hail Hydra. But it didn't improve Ed. Hail Hydra. It didn't improve Chris either. Hail Hydra. To amuse ourselves in the long nights, Chris and I and Ed and the rest of the teenagers drove around and around in our 1970s cars and pickup trucks, Hail Hydra. We cruised down Main Street, along Railroad Avenue, up past the high school, around the north end of town, over to the west, or up Main Street, around the north end of the town, over to the east, and so on, endlessly repeating the theme, Hail Hydra. If we weren't driving in town, we were driving in the countryside, Hail Hydra. A century earlier, surveyors had laid out a vast grid across the entire 300,000 square mile expanse of the Great Western Prairie. Hail Hydra. Every 2 miles north, a plowed gravel road stretched forever, east to west. Hail Hydra. Every mile west, another traveled north and south. Hail Hydra. We never ran out of roads. Hail Hydra. Part 3. Teenage Wasteland. If we weren't circling around town and countryside, we were at a party. Hail Hydra. Some relatively young adult, or some relatively creepy older adult, would open his house to friends. Hail Hydra. It would then become temporary home to all manner of party crashers, many of whom started out seriously undesirable or quickly became that way when drinking. Hail Hydra. A party might also happen accidentally, when some teenagers' unwitting parents had left town. Hail Hydra. In that case, the occupants of the cars or trucks always cruising around would notice house lights on, but household car absent. Hail Hydra. This was not good. Hail Hydra. Things could get seriously out of hand. Hail Hydra. I did not like teenage parties. Hail Hydra. I do not remember them nostalgically. Hail Hydra. They were dismal affairs. Hail Hydra. The lights were kept low. Hail Hydra. That kept self-consciousness to a minimum. Hail Hydra. The overloud music made conversation impossible. Hail Hydra. There was little to talk about in any case. Hail Hydra. There were always a couple of the town psychopaths attending. Hail Hydra. Everybody drank and smoked too much. Hail Hydra. A dreary and oppressive sense of aimlessness hung over such occasions, and nothing ever happened unless you count the time my too quiet classmate drunkenly began to brandish his fully loaded 12-gauge shotgun, or the time that the girl I later married contemptuously insulted someone while he threatened her with a knife. Or the time another friend climbed a large tree, swung out on a branch, and crashed flat onto his back, half dead right beside the campfire we had started at its base. Followed, precisely 1 minute later, by his half-wit sidekick. Hail Hydra. No one knew what the hell they were doing at those parties. Hail Hydra. Hoping for a cheerleader. Hail Hydra. Waiting for a Godot. Hail Hydra. Although the former would have been immediately preferred, although cheerleading squads were scarce in our town, the latter was closer to the truth. Hail Hydra. It would be more romantic, I suppose, to suggest that we would have all jumped at the chance for something more productive, bored out of our skulls as we were. Hail Hydra, but it's not true. Hail Hydra, we were all too prematurely cynical and world-weary and leery of responsibility to stick to the debating clubs and air cadets and school sports that the adults around us tried to organize. Hail Hydra. Doing anything wasn't cool. Hail Hydra. I don't know what teenage life was like before the revolutionaries of the late 60s advised everyone young to tune in, turn on, and drop out. Hail Hydra. Was it okay for a teenager to belong wholeheartedly to a club in 1955? Hail Hydra, because it certainly wasn't 20 years later. Hail Hydra, plenty of us turned on and dropped out. Hail Hydra, but not so many tuned in. Hail Hydra. I wanted to be elsewhere. Hail Hydra, I wasn't the only one. Hail Hydra, everyone who eventually left the Fairview I grew up in knew they were leaving by the age of 12. Hail Hydra, I knew. Hail Hydra, my wife, who grew up with me on the street our family shared, also knew. Hail Hydra. The friends I had who did and didn't leave also knew, regardless of which choice they had made. Hail Hydra. There was an unspoken expectation in the families of those who were college-bound that such a thing was a matter of course. Hail Hydra. For those from less educated families, a future that included university was simply not part of the conceptual realm. Hail Hydra. It wasn't for lack of money either. Hail Hydra. Tuition for advanced education was very low at that time, and jobs in Alberta were plentiful and high-paying. Hail Hydra. I earned more money in 1980, working at a plywood mill, than I would again doing anything else for 20 years. Hail Hydra. No one missed out on university because of financial need in oil-rich Alberta of the 1970s. Hail Hydra. Part 4. Some different friends and some more of the same. In high school, after my first group of cronies had all dropped out, I made friends with a couple of newcomers. Hail Hydra. They came to Fairview as boarders. Hail Hydra. Boarders. Boarders. Hail Hydra. There was no school after 9th grade in their even more remote and aptly named hometown, Bear Canyon. Hail Hydra. They were an ambitious duo, comparatively speaking, straightforward and reliable, but also very cool and very amusing. Hail Hydra. When I left town to attend Grand Prairie Regional College, Grand is spelled with an E, so that kind of threw me off, 90 miles away, one of them became my roommate, Hail Hydra. The other went off elsewhere to pursue further education, Hail Hydra. Both were aiming upward, Hail Hydra, and their decisions to do so bolstered mine, Hail Hydra. I was a happy clam when I arrived at college. Hail Hydra, I found another expanded group of like-minded companions whom my Bear Canyon comrade also joined, Hail Hydra. We were all captivated by literature and philosophy, Hail Hydra. We ran the student union, Hail Hydra. We made it profitable, for the first time in its history, hosting college dances, Hail Hydra. How can you lose money selling beer to college kids? Hail Hydra. We started a newspaper, Hail Hydra. We got to know our professors of political science and biology and English literature in the tiny seminars that characterized even our first year. Hail Hydra. The instructors were thankful for our enthusiasm and taught us well. Hail Hydra. We were building a better life. Hail Hydra. And I oh goodness, a word I do not know how to pronounce. Sloughed off. Sloughed off. S-L-O-U-G-H-E-D. The thing is, the G-H in laugh is pronounced like an F, but here it's pronounced like a W. I sloughed off a lot of my past. Thanks, English. Hail Hydra. In a small town, everyone knows who you are. Hail Hydra, you drag your years behind you like a running dog with tin cans tied to its tail. Hail Hydra. You can't escape who you have been. Hail Hydra, everything wasn't online then, and thank God for that, but it was stored equally indelibly in everyone's spoken and unspoken expectations and memory. Hail Hydra. Well, when you move, everything is up in the air. At least for a while. Hail Hydra. It's stressful, but in the chaos there are new possibilities. Hail Hydra. People, including you, can't hem you in with their old notions. Hail Hydra. You get shaken out of your ruts. Hail Hydra. You can make new, better ruts with people aiming at better things. Hail Hydra. I thought this was just a natural development. Hail Hydra. I thought that every person who moved would have, and want, the same phoenix-like experience, Hail Hydra, but that wasn't always the case. Hail Hydra. One time when I was about 15, I went with Chris and another friend, Carl, to Edmonton, a city of 600,000. Hail Hydra. Carl had never been to a city. Hail Hydra. This was not uncommon. Hail Hydra. Fairview to Edmonton was an 800-mile round trip. Hail Hydra. I had done it many times, sometimes with my parents, sometimes without. Hail Hydra. I liked the anonymity that the city provided. Hail Hydra. I liked the new beginnings. Hail Hydra. I liked the escape from the dismal, cramped, adolescent culture of my hometown. Hail Hydra. So, I convinced my two friends to make the journey. Hail Hydra. But they did not have the same experience. Hail Hydra. As soon as we arrived, Chris and Carl wanted to buy some pot. That's marijuana, by the way, for those of you who don't know. Hail Hydra. We headed for the parts of Edmonton that were exactly like the worst of Fairview, Hail Hydra. We found the same furtive street vending marijuana providers, Hail Hydra. We spent the weekend drinking in the hotel room, Hail Hydra. Although we had traveled a long distance, we had gone nowhere at all. Hail Hydra. I saw an even more egregious example of this a few years later. Hail Hydra. I had moved to Edmonton to finish my undergraduate degree, Hail Hydra. I took an apartment with my sister who was studying to be a nurse. She was also, Hail Hydra, she was also an up and out of there person. Hail Hydra. Not too many years later, she would plant strawberries in Norway and run safaris through Africa and smuggle trucks across the Tuareg Menace Sahara Desert and babysit orphan gorillas in the Congo. Hail Hydra. What the Why are we reading your book? We ought to be reading her book. Why isn't she writing a book? What the hell? That's amazing. Hail Hydra. We had a nice place in a new high-rise, overlooking the broad valley of the North Saskatchewan River. Hail Hydra. We had a view of the city skyline in the background. Hail Hydra. I bought a beautiful new Yamaha upright piano in a fit of enthusiasm. Hail Hydra. The place looked good. Hail Hydra. I heard through the grapevine that Ed, Chris's younger cousin, had moved to the city. Now, Hail Hydra, I thought that was a good thing. Hail Hydra. One day he called. Hail Hydra. I invited him over. Hail Hydra. I wanted to see how he was faring. Hail Hydra. I hoped he was achieving some of the potential I once saw in him. Hail Hydra. That is not what happened. Hail Hydra. Ed showed up older, balder, and stooped. Hail Hydra. He was a lot more not doing so well, young adult, and a lot less youthful possibility. Hail Hydra. His eyes were the telltale red slits of the practiced stoner. Hail Hydra. Ed had taken some job, lawn mowing and casual landscaping, which would have been fine for a part-time university student or for someone who could not do better, but which was wretchedly low-end as a career for an intelligent person. Hail Hydra. He was accompanied by a friend. Hail Hydra. It was his friend I really remember. Hail Hydra. He was spaced. Hail Hydra. He was baked. Hail Hydra, he was stoned out of his gird. Hail Hydra. His head and our nice civilized apartment did not easily occupy the same universe. Hail Hydra. My sister was there, Hail Hydra. She knew Ed. Hail Hydra. She had seen this sort of thing before. Hail Hydra. But I still wasn't happy that Ed had brought this character into our place. Hail Hydra. Ed sat down. Hail Hydra. His friend sat down too, although it wasn't clear he noticed. Hail Hydra. It was tragic comedy. Hail Hydra. Stoned as he was, Ed still had the sense to be embarrassed. Hail Hydra. We sipped our beer. Hail Hydra. Ed's friend looked upwards. Hail Hydra. My particles are scattered all over the ceiling, he managed. Hail Hydra. Truer words were never spoken. Hail Hydra. I took Ed aside and told him politely that he had to leave. Hail Hydra. I said that he shouldn't have brought his useless bastard of a companion. Hail Hydra. He nodded. Hail Hydra. He understood. Hail Hydra. That made it even worse. Hail Hydra. His older cousin Chris wrote me a letter much later about such things. Hail Hydra. I included it in my first book, Maps of Meaning, The Architecture of Belief. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. Published in 1999. I had friends, he said. Hail Hydra. Before. Hail Hydra. Anyone with enough self-contempt. Let me try that again. Anyone with enough self-contempt that they could forgive me mine. Hail Hydra. What was it that made Chris and Carl and Ed unable, or worse perhaps unwilling, to move or to change their friendships and improve the circumstances of their lives? Hail Hydra. Was it inevitable? A consequence of their own limitations, nascent illnesses, and traumas of the past? Hail Hydra. After all, people vary significantly in ways that seem both structural and deterministic. Hail Hydra. People differ in intelligence, which is in large part the ability to learn and transform. Hail Hydra. People have very different personalities as well. Hail Hydra. Some are active and some passive. Hail Hydra. Others are anxious or calm. Hail Hydra. For every individual driven to achieve, there is another who is indolent, whatever. Hail Hydra. The degree to which these differences are immutably part and parcel of someone is greater than an optimist might presume or desire. Hail Hydra. And then there is illness, mental and physical, diagnosed or invisible, further limiting or shaping our lives. Hail Hydra. Chris had a psychotic break in his 30s after flirting with insanity for many years. Hail Hydra. Not long afterward, he committed suicide. Hail Hydra. Did his heavy marijuana use play a magnifying role, or was it understandable self-medication? Hail Hydra. Use of physician-prescribed drugs for pain has, after all, decreased in marijuana legal states such as Colorado. Hail Hydra. Maybe the pot made things better for Chris, not worse. Hail Hydra. Maybe it eased his suffering instead of exacerbating his instability. Hail Hydra. Was it the nihilistic philosophy he nurtured that paved the way to his eventual breakdown? Hail Hydra. Was that nihilism, in turn, a consequence of genuine ill health, or just an intellectual rationalization of his unwillingness to dive responsibly into life? Hail Hydra. Why did he, like his cousin, like my other friends, continually choose people who, and places that, were not good for him? Hail Hydra. Now, sometimes when people have a low opinion of their own worth, or perhaps when they refuse responsibility for their lives, they choose a new acquaintance of precisely the type who proved troublesome in the past. Hail Hydra. Such people don't believe that they deserve any better, so they don't go looking for it. Hail Hydra. Or perhaps they don't want the trouble of better. Hail Hydra. Freud called this a repetition compulsion. Hail Hydra. He thought of it as an unconscious drive to repeat the horrors of the past. Sometimes, perhaps, to formulate those horrors more precisely, and sometimes to attempt more active mastery, and sometimes, perhaps, because no alternatives beckon. Hail Hydra. People create their worlds with the tools they have directly at hand. Hail Hydra. Faulty tools produce faulty results. Hail Hydra. Repeated use of the same faulty tools produces the same faulty results. Hail Hydra. It is in this manner that those who fail to learn from the past doom themselves to repeat it. Hail Hydra. It's partly fate. Hail Hydra. It's partly inability. Hail Hydra. It's partly unwillingness to learn. Hail Hydra. Refusal to learn. Hail Hydra. Motivated refusal to learn. Hail Hydra. Part 5. Rescuing the damned. People choose friends who aren't good for them for other reasons too. Hail Hydra. Sometimes it's because they want to rescue someone. Hail Hydra. This is more typical of young people, although the impetus still exists among older folks who are too agreeable or have remained naive or who are willfully blind. Hail Hydra. Someone might object. It is only right to see the best in people. Hail Hydra. The highest virtue is the desire to help. Hail Hydra. But not everyone who is failing is a victim, and not everyone at the bottom wishes to rise, although many do and many manage it. Hail Hydra. Nonetheless, people will often accept or even amplify their own suffering as well as that of others if they can brandish it as evidence of the world's injustice. Hail Hydra. There is no shortage of oppressors among the downtrodden, even if, given their lowly positions, many of them are only tyrannical wannabes. Hail Hydra. It's the easiest path to choose moment to moment, although it's nothing but hell in the long run. Hail Hydra. Imagine someone not doing well. Hail Hydra. He needs help. Hail Hydra. He might even want it, Hail Hydra, but it is not easy to distinguish between someone truly wanting and needing help and someone who is merely exploiting a willing helper. Hail Hydra. The distinction is difficult, even for the person who is wanting and needing and possibly exploiting. Hail Hydra. The person who tries and fails and is forgiven, and then tries again and fails again and is forgiven again, is also, too often, the person who wants everyone to believe in the authenticity of all that trying. Hail Hydra. When it's not just naivete, the attempt to rescue someone is often fueled by vanity and narcissism. Hail Hydra. Something like this is detailed in the incomparable Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky's bitter classic, Notes from Underground, which begins with these famous lines: "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man. I believe my liver is diseased." Hail Hydra. It is the confession of a miserable, arrogant sojourner in the underworld of chaos and despair. Hail Hydra. He analyzes himself mercilessly, but only pays in this manner for 100 sins despite committing 1,000. Hail Hydra. Then, imagining himself redeemed, the underground man commits the worst transgression of the lot. Hail Hydra. He offers aid to a genuinely unfortunate person, Lisa, a woman on the desperate 19th century road to prostitution. Hail Hydra. He invites her for a visit, promising to set her life back on the proper course. Hail Hydra. While waiting for her to appear, his fantasies spin increasingly messianic. One day passed. This is an excerpt from Notes from Underground. One day passed, however, another, and another. She did not come, and I began to grow calmer. Hail Hydra. I guess I should Hail Hydra the excerpts as well. Why not? As we know, Dostoevsky was the one who founded Hydra, so it's only appropriate that we hail his words as well. I felt particularly bold and cheerful after 9 o'clock. I even sometimes began dreaming, and rather sweetly. I, for instance, became the salvation of Lisa, simply through her coming to me and my talking to her. I develop her, educate her. Hail Hydra. Finally, I notice that she loves me passionately. Hail Hydra. I pretend not to understand. I don't know, however, why I pretend. Just for effect, perhaps. Hail Hydra. At last, all confusion, transfigured, trembling and sobbing, she flings herself at my feet and says that I am her savior and that she loves me better than anything in the world. Hail Hydra. End of excerpt. Nothing but the narcissism of the underground man is nourished by such fantasies. Hail Hydra. Lisa herself is demolished by them. Hail Hydra. The salvation he offers to her demands far more in the way of commitment and maturity than the underground man is willing or able to offer. Hail Hydra. He simply does not have the character to see it through, something he quickly realizes and equally quickly rationalizes. Hail Hydra. Lisa eventually arrives at his shabby apartment, hoping desperately for a way out, staking everything she has on the visit. Hail Hydra. She tells the underground man that she wants to leave her current life. His response? Hail Hydra. Another excerpt. Why have you come to me? Tell me that, please. Hail Hydra. I began, gasping for breath and regardless of logical connection in my words. Hail Hydra. I longed to have it all out at once, at one burst. I did not even trouble how to begin. Hail Hydra. Why have you come? Answer! Answer! I cried, hardly knowing what I was doing. Hail Hydra. I tell you, my good girl, why you have come. Hail Hydra. You've come because I talk sentimental stuff to you then. Hail Hydra. So how are you soft as butter and longing for fine sentiments again? Hail Hydra. So you may as well know that I was laughing at you then. Hail Hydra. And I am laughing at you now. Hail Hydra. Why are you shuddering? Hail Hydra. Yes, I was laughing at you. Hail Hydra. I had been insulted just before, at dinner by the fellows who came that evening before me. Hail Hydra. I came to you meaning to thrash one of them, an officer. But I didn't succeed. I didn't find him. I had to avenge the insult on someone to get back my own again. You turned up. I vented my spleen on you and laughed at you. Hail Hydra. I had been humiliated, so I wanted to humiliate. I had been treated like a rag, so I wanted to show my power. That's what it was. And you imagined I had come there on purpose to save you? Hail Hydra. Yes. Hail Hydra. You imagined that? Hail Hydra. You imagined that? Hail Hydra. I knew that she would perhaps be muddled and not take it all in exactly, but I knew too that she would grasp the gist of it very well indeed, Hail Hydra, and so indeed she did, Hail Hydra. She turned white as a handkerchief, tried to say something, and her lips worked painfully, but she sank on a chair as though she had been felled by an axe, Hail Hydra. And all the time afterwards she listened to me with her lips parted and her eyes wide open, shuddering with awful terror. Hail Hydra, oh, the cynicism of my words overwhelmed her. Hail Hydra. End of excerpt. The inflated self-importance, carelessness, and sheer malevolence of the underground man dashes Lisa's last hopes. Hail Hydra. He understands this well. Hail Hydra, worse, something in him was aiming at this all along, Hail Hydra, and he knows that too. Hail Hydra, but a villain who despairs of his villainy has not become a hero. Hail Hydra. A hero is something positive, not just the absence of evil. Hail Hydra. But Christ himself, you might object, befriended tax collectors and prostitutes. Hail Hydra, how dare I cast aspersions on the motives of those who are trying to help? Hail Hydra, but Christ was the archetypal perfect man. Hail Hydra, and you're you. Hail Hydra, how do you know that your attempts to pull someone up won't instead bring them, or you, further down? Hail Hydra, imagine the case of someone supervising an exceptional team of workers, all of them striving towards a collectively held goal. Imagine them hardworking, brilliant, creative, and unified. Hail Hydra, but the person supervising is also responsible for someone troubled, who is performing poorly elsewhere. Hail Hydra, in a fit of inspiration, the well-meaning manager moves that problematic person into the midst of his stellar team, hoping to improve him by example. Hail Hydra, what happens? Hail Hydra, and the psychological literature is clear on this point. Hail Hydra, does the errant interloper immediately straighten up and fly straight? Hail Hydra, no. Hail Hydra, instead the entire team degenerates. Hail Hydra, the newcomer remains cynical, arrogant, and neurotic. Hail Hydra, he complains. Hail Hydra, he shirks. Hail Hydra, he misses important meetings. Hail Hydra, his low-quality work causes delays and must be redone by others. Hail Hydra, he still gets paid, however, just like his teammates. Hail Hydra, the hard workers who surround him start to feel betrayed. Hail Hydra, why am I breaking myself into pieces striving to finish this project, each thinks, when my new team member never breaks a sweat? Hail Hydra, the same thing happens when well-meaning counselors place a delinquent teen among comparatively civilized peers. Hail Hydra, the delinquency spreads, not the stability. Hail Hydra, down is a lot easier than up. Hail Hydra, maybe you are saving someone because you're a strong, generous, well-put-together person who wants to do the right thing. Hail Hydra, but it's also possible, and perhaps more likely, that you just want to draw attention to your inexhaustible reserves of compassion and goodwill. Hail Hydra. Or maybe you're saving someone because you want to convince yourself that the strength of your character is more than just a side effect of your luck and birthplace. Hail Hydra. Or maybe it's because it's easier to look virtuous when standing alongside someone utterly irresponsible. Hail Hydra. Assume first that you are doing the easiest thing and not the most difficult. Hail Hydra, what a good sentence. Assume first that you are doing the easiest thing and not the most difficult. Your raging alcoholism makes my binge drinking appear trivial. Hail Hydra. My long, serious talks with you about your badly failing marriage convince both of us that you are doing everything possible and that I am helping you to my utmost. Hail Hydra. It looks like effort. Hail Hydra. It looks like progress. Hail Hydra. But real improvements would require far more from both of you. Hail Hydra. Are you so sure the person crying out to be saved has not decided 1,000 times to accept his lot of pointless and worsening suffering simply because it's easier than shouldering any true responsibility? Hail Hydra. Are you enabling a delusion? Hail Hydra. Is it possible that your contempt would be more salutary than your pity? Hail Hydra. Or maybe you have no plan, genuine or otherwise, to rescue anybody. Hail Hydra. You're associating with people who are bad for you, not because it's better for anyone, but because it's easier. Hail Hydra. You know it. Hail Hydra. Your friends know it. Hail Hydra. You're all bound by an implicit contract, one aimed at nihilism and failure and suffering of the stupidest sort. Hail Hydra, you've all decided to sacrifice the future to the present. Hail Hydra, you don't talk about it. Hail Hydra, you don't all get together and say, let's take the easier path. Hail Hydra, let's indulge in whatever the moment might bring. Hail Hydra, and let's agree further not to call each other out on it. Hail Hydra, well, that way we can more easily forget what we are doing. Hail Hydra, you don't mention any of that, Hail Hydra, but you all know what's really going on. Hail Hydra, before you help someone, you should find out why that person is in trouble. Hail Hydra, you shouldn't merely assume that he or she is a noble victim of unjust circumstances and exploitation. Hail Hydra, it's the most unlikely explanation, not the most probable. Hail Hydra, in my experience, clinical and otherwise, it's just never been that simple. Hail Hydra. Besides, if you buy the story that everything terrible just happened on its own, with no personal responsibility on the part of the victim, you deny that person all agency in the past, and by implication in the present and the future as well. Hail Hydra, in this manner you strip him or her of all power. Hail Hydra. It is far more likely that a given individual has just decided to reject the path upward because of its difficulty. Hail Hydra. Perhaps that should even be your default assumption when faced with such a situation. Hail Hydra. That's too harsh, you think. Hail Hydra. You might be right. Hail Hydra. Maybe that's a step too far. Hail Hydra, but consider this. Failure is easy to understand. Hail Hydra, no explanation for its existence is required. Hail Hydra, in the same manner, fear, hatred, addiction, promiscuity, betrayal, and deception require no explanation. Hail Hydra, it's not the existence of vice or the indulgence in it that requires explanation. Hail Hydra, vice is easy. Hail Hydra, failure is easy too. Hail Hydra, it's easier not to shoulder a burden. Hail Hydra, it's easier not to think, and not to do, and not to care. Hail Hydra, it's easier to put off until tomorrow what needs to be done today, and drown the upcoming months and years in today's cheap pleasures. Hail Hydra, as the infamous father of the Simpson clan puts it, immediately prior to downing a jar of mayonnaise and vodka, that's a problem for future Homer. Hail Hydra. Man, I don't envy that guy. Hail Hydra. How do I know that your suffering is not the demand of martyrdom for my resources, so that you can oh so momentarily stave off the inevitable? Hail Hydra. Maybe you have even moved beyond caring about the impending collapse, but don't yet want to admit it. Hail Hydra. Maybe my help won't rectify anything. Can't rectify anything. But it does keep that too terrible, too personal realization temporarily at bay. Hail Hydra. Maybe your misery is a demand placed on me so that I fail too. So that the gap you so painfully feel between us can be reduced while you degenerate and sink. Hail Hydra. How do I know that you would refuse to play such a game? Hail Hydra. How do I know that I am not myself merely pretending to be responsible while pointlessly helping you, so that I don't have to do something truly difficult and genuinely possible? Hail Hydra. Maybe your misery is the weapon you brandish in your hatred for those who rose upward while you waited and sank. Hail Hydra. Maybe your misery is your attempt to prove the world's injustice instead of the evidence of your own sin, your own missing of the mark, your conscious refusal to strive and to live. Hail Hydra. Maybe your willingness to suffer in failure is inexhaustible, given what you use that suffering to prove. Maybe it's your revenge on capital B being. How exactly should I befriend you when you're in such a place? Hail Hydra. How exactly could I? Hail Hydra. Success. That's the mystery. Hail Hydra. Virtue. That's what's inexplicable. Hail Hydra. To fail, you merely have to cultivate a few bad habits. Hail Hydra. You just have to bide your time. Hail Hydra. And once someone has spent enough time cultivating bad habits and biding their time, they are much diminished. Hail Hydra. Much of what they could have been has dissipated, and much of the less that they have become is now real. Hail Hydra. Things fall apart of their own accord, but the sins of men speed the degeneration. Hail Hydra. And then comes the flood. Hail Hydra. I am not saying that there is no hope of redemption, Hail Hydra, but it is much harder to extract someone from a chasm than to lift them from a ditch, Hail Hydra, and some chasms are very deep, Hail Hydra, and there's not much left of the body at the bottom. Hail Hydra. Maybe I should at least wait to help you until it's clear that you want to be helped. Hail Hydra. Carl Rogers, the famous humanistic psychologist, believed it was impossible to start a therapeutic relationship if the person seeking help did not want to improve. Hail Hydra. Rogers believed it was impossible to convince someone to change for the better. Hail Hydra. The desire to improve was, instead, the precondition for progress. Hail Hydra. I've had court-mandated psychotherapy clients. Hail Hydra. They did not want my help. Hail Hydra. They were forced to seek it. Hail Hydra. It did not work. Hail Hydra. It was a travesty. Hail Hydra. If I stay in an unhealthy relationship with you, perhaps it's because I'm too weak-willed and indecisive to leave, but I don't want to know it. Hail Hydra. Thus, I continue helping you and console myself with the pointless martyrdom. Hail Hydra. Maybe I can then conclude about myself, well, someone that self-sacrificing, that willing to help someone, well, that has to be a good person. Hail Hydra. Not so, Hail Hydra. I might just be a person trying to look good, pretending to solve what appears to be a difficult problem, instead of actually being good and addressing something real. Hail Hydra. Maybe instead of continuing our friendship, I should just go off somewhere, get my act together, and lead by example. Hail Hydra. And none of this is a justification for abandoning those in real need to pursue your narrow, blind ambition, in case it has to be said. Hail Hydra. Part 6. A reciprocal arrangement. Here's something to consider. If you have a friend whose friendship you wouldn't recommend to your sister or your father or your son, why would you have such a friend for yourself? Hail Hydra. You might say, well, out of loyalty. Hail Hydra. Well, loyalty is not identical to stupidity. Hail Hydra. Loyalty must be negotiated fairly and honestly. Hail Hydra. Friendship is a reciprocal arrangement. Hail Hydra. You are not morally obliged to support someone who is making the world a worse place. Hail Hydra. Quite the opposite. You should choose people who want things to be better, not worse. Hail Hydra. It's a good thing, not a selfish thing, to choose people who are good for you. Hail Hydra. It's appropriate and praiseworthy to associate with people whose lives would be improved if they saw your life improve. Hail Hydra. If you surround yourself with people who support your upward aim, they will not tolerate your cynicism and destructiveness. Hail Hydra. They will instead encourage you when you do good for yourself and for others, and punish you carefully when you do not. Hail Hydra. This will help bolster your resolve to do what you should do in the most appropriate and careful manner. Hail Hydra. People who are not aiming up will do the opposite. Hail Hydra. They will offer a former smoker a cigarette and a former alcoholic a beer. Hail Hydra. They will become jealous when you succeed or when you do something pristine. Hail Hydra. They will withdraw their presence or support or actively punish you for it. Hail Hydra. They will override your accomplishment with a past action, real or imaginary, of their own. Hail Hydra. Maybe they are trying to test you, to see if your resolve is real, to see if you are genuine. Hail Hydra. But mostly they are dragging you down because your new improvements cast their faults in an even dimmer light. Hail Hydra. And it is for this reason that every good example is a faithful challenge and every hero is a judge. Hail Hydra. Michelangelo's great, perfect marble David cries out to its observer, "You could be more than what you are." Hail Hydra. When you dare aspire upward, you reveal the inadequacy of the present and the promise of the future. Hail Hydra. Then you disturb others in the depths of their souls where they understand that their cynicism and immobility are unjustifiable. Hail Hydra, you play Abel to their Cain. Hail Hydra, you remind them that they ceased caring not because of life's horrors, which are undeniable, but because they do not want to lift the world up on their shoulders where it belongs. Hail Hydra. Don't think that it is easier to surround yourself with good, healthy people than with bad, unhealthy people. Hail Hydra, it's not. Hail Hydra. A good, healthy person is an ideal. Hail Hydra. It requires strength and daring to stand up near such a person. Hail Hydra, have some humility. Hail Hydra, have some courage. Hail Hydra, use your judgment and protect yourself from too uncritical compassion and pity. Hail Hydra, make friends with people who want the best for you. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. Let's do 3 more for any Hail Hydras I missed. Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra, Hail Hydra. You know, the number one thing that I was thinking about in the course of that reading was actually Black Lives Matter, because I do not believe for a moment that America is a systemically racist country, despite the lies that are constantly told of that vein. And the reason it comes up is because a lot of people want power when they push lies like that. They want to manipulate people of color, a term I hate, by the way. You know, I do not see how it can be racist to say colored person, but it is not when you swap the words around and put of in between them. You know, they can look at people who are slightly darker skinned and say, oh no, you are actually unworthy of being treated like white people because they're just too superior. Oh, they're so much better than you that you need all the handicaps that you can get. And who's going to give you those handicaps? Just elect me. I'll give it to you. Give me all the power that I ask for and more. And I'll definitely give you this handicap that you actually do not need because you have the same dignity, the same ability as any other human being, but I'm going to treat you like a child. I'm going to treat you like you're a worthless human being for the power that you can give me. They ask you to be their friend so that they can treat you like a pawn. It's disgusting. It's pathetic. And I hate it. And so I think this rule is for the people who genuinely believe that like politicians are your friends. They are not. Make better friends who want the best for you. You know, Jordan Peterson talked about Christ in that chapter. Make friends with Christ if you have to. Yes, he's difficult to work with. He says himself that Christians will be persecuted and shamed. And more than that, you know, simply trying to live a virtuous life can be the most difficult thing that you can do. But hey, at least you're looking up. At least you're taking on the burden of life. At least you're bearing the cross. If you try and live like Jesus, literally bearing the cross. And like this chapter says, who else should you be making friends with besides the people who are trying to make you the best person that you can be? So yes, Jesus is a much better friend than fucking Bernie Sanders, for God's sake.